Welcome to your podcast, Leadership is Tricky, where we'll tackle various topics, challenges, and experiences as it relates to your investment in leadership. So, let's design success together. Now your hosts.
Hey everyone, Eric Ocasio here with Leadership is Tricky, and we are back. Here we are in season 5, and I have a special guest. I have Paul McVeigh. Some of you might know him, some of you might not, but you're going to get to know him here in this episode. How you doing, Paul?
Good, very well, Eric. Congrats on getting to season 5, by the way.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it's been a long grind. But for those that don't know you, Paul, who are you?
My goodness, what a question that is.
Now we'll scale it back. Just introduce yourself to the fans, and then we'll get into your story. But you and I met a
Yeah,
couple weeks ago. But yeah, just
yeah,
introduce yourself to the fans, and then we'll get going.
I will do. But it's a great question actually about who are you because we've probably been trying to study that about ourselves for millennia now. And just quickly on that, I heard this little quote a few years ago, and it was just quite apropos for your opening line, and it was we can't be our thoughts because sometimes our thoughts lead us in direction. I'd probably be arrested if we were our thoughts, and we
100%.
can't be our emotions because as humans we're such emotional creatures up down, so we're probably not any one of those, and we can't be judged on every single behavior we've ever had or ever done. So what a question that is. Who are we? But for anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Paul. I used to play football for a living, soccer, as all of your listeners and followers will know it as across the whole of North America, etc. But yeah, I used to play in the English Premier League, and it was an amazing journey. Really, really good fun. Lots of hard times, lots of amazing times playing against the best of the best players, which was just like a boyhood dream, living that, playing at the best stadia across England, across the UK, and across Europe and the world, because playing internationally for Northern Ireland. So I did that for nearly 20 years, and then for the last 15 years, I've been in this world of leadership development. I just always loved it as a kid. Always was really fascinated when I was introduced to this world of personal development. And it's something that I've applied in my own life and saw the benefits from my career, especially from a sporting perspective in that elite performance environment. But ultimately, it's delivering these kind of insights and expertise to the biggest corporates in the world.
So two things that I love in this world is sports and leadership, right? So that activity of leadership. So yeah, when you and I connected a few weeks ago, it was like a match made in heaven. And I'm glad that you chose to share with the audience your story and allow me to capture your story. So welcome to the Leadership is Tricky podcast. So hey, so let's take it all the way back, right? So for those of you that have heard, Paul does have he in his world it's probably not an accent, but in mine it is, right? So you're from Belfast, Ireland. So let's talk about young Paul growing up in Ireland, and because we're about the same age, so the early to mid '90s, right? It was just a different time in that
Yeah.
space. So how was it growing up in Ireland?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting whenever I talk about it or if I've ever been asked about it. And the only way I can answer that is honestly, it was just normal. It was just like, you get up in the morning, you get, your mum and dad chasing you out the door to get to school and make sure you've got all your stuff for school. And then once I was at school, I was just there with my friends, and always trying to play soccer before you started your lessons, in the break time afterwards. Then you came home and then you threw your bag in the door and went, right, mum, I'm way back out into the street to play again. And you literally just played it all day long with your friends in the street. And I suppose that's why I felt it was so normal. But of course, as you were playing in the street with 20, 25 kids, or how many were there, you ended up after, inevitably a couple of hours of playing with your friends, kicking a ball around in the street, and then suddenly you'd hear this explosion of just a car bomb or some sort of Semtex being exploded, and these bombs were going off on a regular basis in Belfast in the 70s, 80s, and 90s that I grew up in before I left in 1994. And it was just surreal, I think is the probably the best way to put it. Obviously, I call it normal, but probably for most people, it's not normal to hear bombs going off on a regular basis, or, there'd be tanks and patrols, British soldiers coming past us in the street, and they'd be in full, military getup, like the fact that, that's your employer at the minute, Eric. You understand the whole military world, that whenever armies deploy to different countries, they don't go in there in their suits and in their best dress. They go in the army getup, and they've got their full gear on, they've got their rifles walking past the street, they've got their helmets on because they just don't know at any stage when they might get attacked. So that was really, really interesting that I thought it was normal. And it was only in 1994 when I came across to join Tottenham Hotspur in the English Premier League that suddenly I arrived in leafy North London and realized that it wasn't that normal because there was no bombs going off
Right.
in England and London. There was no soldiers walking down the street and there was no tanks driving past me. So that was probably the time when the penny really dropped for me.
No, that's the one. Thanks for sharing. But yeah, it probably wasn't normal. But yeah, we are what we are, right? And we grow up in a space where mom, dad, they keep things together and they kind of shield us from a lot of the noise that's happening around us. Because for folks that have heard my story too, right? We grew up very poor. We grew up in an environment where it was full of all those things that we would just say it's not normal. We kind of cringe at, right? Now that we're grown and we kind of look back on life, but it shapes us, right?
Mhm.
And it makes us who we are. So, and you mentioned even in your short introduction, right? We talk a lot about football and soccer, and you would come home, drop your bag, and go hit the streets to go play some more. So, here in I guess the rest of the world, soccer is
Mhm.
a big deal, right? And they play it everywhere, and it's just if you've ever been not never been to a soccer match, you've got anywhere from 70 to 100,000 people in a stadium, and it's rocking, and people love it. And just here in Germany, kids play it every day, everywhere. So when did you get that affinity for football? Was just something just in your DNA to say that's the sport that I want? What was that moment where you said, this is what I want to do?
And obviously, growing up in Ireland, we had lots of the Irish sports of Gaelic football and hurling, so they were everywhere as well. People were constantly playing them at school. My school didn't actually play soccer; we only played Irish sports. So it was only probably when I was about 14 or 15 that I started getting involved in Gaelic football, just because I'd always played soccer rather than the Gaelic football. But ultimately, it was just something that you did. It was probably the easiest way to entertain yourself, the cheapest way, most
Yeah.
cost effective, that one ball can effectively entertain 20 to 50 kids, depending on how
Right.
many people come out of the street. And it was just something that we did. It's interesting, from your perspective, coming from the US, you would have had it maybe as the fifth or sixth thing. Although I know it was really popular when you were growing up, it just didn't ever make it into the professional ranks because obviously the NFL and the NBA and the NHL and everything else all had their draws, probably more than the MLS at the time. But ultimately, it's something you saw every single week. So it was like when you see these people, you want to emulate them, you want to be them, you want to score the winning goal in the FA Cup final, you want to play in the Premier League. And I was no different. I just had these heroes like your Paul Gascoignes and your Gianfranco Zolas and Eric Cantonas and all these amazing players. And I just wanted to be like that. And it was only when I got across the Tottenham Hotspur in 94 on my first day, I met a German World Cup winner, a guy who maybe some of your audience might know because he was the US men's national team coach called Jurgen Klinsmann.
Right.
And Jurgen had actually just starred in the USA 94 Soccer World Cup. And because that was such a, massive time for me of leaving Ireland, leaving all my friends and family to go and essentially build my own career, build my own life. But to meet Jurgen on my first day was really monumental for me, and not in a good way, as some
Oh,
people might be assuming here, because it was actually meeting someone like Jurgen who had got to the pinnacle. As you say, this is the number one sport in the world. More people play it than anyone else in the world. It's got more money than anyone else. And essentially meeting him had this huge impact on what I realize now is this inferiority complex that I had. And
okay.
that's a whole other podcast of why I might have had that. But the fact
Right.
that I had it, I met Jurgen straight away. I just thought there's no way I could ever be a professional or a Premier League player or an international player, which is what I wanted to be, if Jurgen was the kind of person I needed to be.
Yeah, so you grow up wanting to play the sport and get to the peak, right? And you say your first day you meet your hero, right? The guy that you looked up to, and yeah, we won't touch on the inferiority complex, right? But let's talk about like now you're a professional, right? You've grinded, you've gotten to the peak, right? And I'm talking about that's the top maybe less than 1% when it comes to soccer in the world, right? Just the mass amount of people that make it to the professional ranks, right? What did you feel in that moment when you found out I'm going to be a professional? What was that feeling that said, okay, I have to be a high performer now? What was the pressure that you felt in that moment?
Well, I think initially real excitement, but also a lot of intrepidation as well. And just to clarify, the way that you would relate it to the US pathways for elite sports is I wasn't a professional. At 16, I was only a youth team player. We call them like academy team players now. And so in terms of monetary remuneration, I was getting £26 per week. But
Right.
let me tell you, Eric, even in 1994 was not a lot of money. So essentially, what they got was a 2-year apprenticeship, and it gave you the opportunity to try and fight for a professional contract. So yes, you're right. You did get into that 1% of people who just got to a professional club that started full time. Most don't get there. But even then, it was 2 years of proving yourself. And after, 2 years of really working hard, giving everything I had, I was very fortunate that I was given a 1-year contract at Tottenham Hotspur. But interestingly, I was the lowest paid player at the club. So that
Was it
just
more
shows
than
where I,
26?
well, it wasn't a lot. It was, I think it went up to about £200 per week. So it wasn't a
Right.
lot, but it was, but then of course you're now paying for your accommodation, you're paying for your travel, all the stuff that the club paid for previously. But ultimately, I had to get in and I had an option to either go and have a 4-year college degree in the US on a scholarship, all completely paid for because of my soccer ability, or I could take this 1-year contract at Tottenham Hotspur where I kind of thought, what's the point? Because they're only giving me a 1-year contract. I'm the lowest paid player of the club. They clearly don't really value me. Let's be honest. They haven't given me like a 5-year, on
Right,
ridiculous
right.
money. And so I thought, it's a big sacrifice to give up a college career, and that's why the college athletes still aren't pros. You don't get into the pro game until you've gone through the college system, and then you come out. And it was the same with us. At 2 years, I finally managed to get a 1-year pro, and it was really tough. But that was the summer that really changed for me because I went from having a real issue with my breathing and actually had an operation on my nose and kind of just massively improved my efficiency, which really helped. I also had this, must have had a huge boost in confidence because I did become a pro and I did turn down the scholarship in the US and became a pro, but suddenly I was training with the best players. You had almost had two training groups. One was the professional group and one was the academy group. And when I get in and started training with the professional group, you're there suddenly with like the best players in the world, the likes of people like Teddy Sheringham, who went on to win the treble with Manchester United, Sol Campbell, who became an invincible with Arsenal, Darren Anderton, who was one of England's best players at the time. And I was training with these guys day in, day out. And I suppose what that really awakened in me was the gap of where I was on my first step of this ladder. Yes, I might get to I'm in the 1% now. But once you turn pro, you're in the 0.5%. And then I wanted to try and get into the 0.0001% that actually could play in the Premier League. But very, very fortunately, I had a teammate who come through the academy system with me. His name was Rory Allen. And Rory was really great guy, but he also was, our best player coming through the youth team with me. And as Rory, after about 4 or 5 months of us both turning pro, in his debut, he made his debut against Manchester United. So, Eric, you might know some of these players like David Beckham and Ryan Giggs and Roy Keane and Paul Scholes and all these other amazing players. And Rory, my friend Rory Allen, made his debut against Manchester United and scored live on TV on Monday Night Football, under the lights at White Hart
Right.
Lane. Amazing experience. And that was when I suddenly had this little flick of a switch in my brain and seeing my mate, and if we go back a few moments of talking about that inferiority complex I had with Jurgen Klinsmann. It wasn't Jurgen scoring against Manchester United, it was my mate seeing Rory score. And I saw him score and I was so happy for him. But it made me think, wow, if he can do that, then so can I. And within 3 months, I made my Premier League debut, and then I scored on my home debut, similar to what Rory did.
You know, it's crazy. There was probably somebody watching you in that moment that's telling the same story. If they saw Paul McVeigh score, I met him, or, that's my guy, or we played in the streets back in, Belfast and one day and they're aspiring to be that, right? So, because that takes me to really leadership, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what we want to do is we want to inspire or motivate people to see themselves in our stories or our experiences, sometimes even our trauma, right? So that way they can get something from that. So you go on to have, this long career in professional sports. You're a high performer. And just from you telling us about your journey, right? You had multiple coaches. Is there like a leadership figure or a coach or someone that kind of really inspired you? Um,
No.
I'm,
I
I'm
wish
pretty
I
sure you
wish
had
I
a couple.
could. I
Okay.
wish I could tell you, and unfortunately, I wish I could give you like like a John Wooden figure, or
Right.
or a Pat Riley, or someone where you could go, "Do you know what, this guy." It didn't happen. It
Mm,
really didn't happen. It's a shame, and I think it's a severe lack of inspiration in coaches. They were very much kind of carrot and stick. It was like just beat you until you kind of did what they said, which is, as we know, is not the best form of leadership. And interesting, I'm just writing my second book at the minute, Eric, called The Psychology of Leadership. And it just is trying to explore all of the different ways, apart. It used to be, especially in the era that I played professionally, it was just that, the alpha male, the kind of the guy that dominated, could shout the loudest, was kind of the one that beat the stick and you just did what they said. Now we know now that works for some, works a little bit for most, but actually it doesn't work for the majority of people to get the best out of them. And so I didn't have that, unfortunately, in my playing career, which is why I probably am so passionate about sharing this with the corporate space. And I think what I've really, really taken from this, 31, 32 year career that I've been working now since I started at 16 is, you know, how do we help people understand what world-class performance is? Because I was so fortunate, just to get plucked out of Belfast at 16 and set down in this high performance environment. And I didn't realize that even, meeting Jurgen Klinsmann was already a World Cup winner. My coach on that first day at 1994 was an Argentinian World Cup winner in Ozzy Ardiles. But when you share these stories with people, they're like, oh, that's quite nice. And then when you start trying to help them apply it to their world in the corporate world of what they're doing, it suddenly helps open up their eyes to go, I didn't realize just the levels that it took to get to that. And that's why it's so hard because most people aren't capable of doing it. And even if they were capable of doing it, most people don't have the ability or the desire to do it. So this is really fascinating why I love this space because ultimately my pitch whenever we're speaking about our long-term leadership programs that any of the big corporates we work with is how can you expect to deliver world-class performance when you've never been around world-class performers?
right. 100%. But just going back though, because I know you mentioned, you just didn't have that, inspiration, right? But I
Mm.
would almost flip it on its head, right? You didn't experience great coaches, right? That it inspired you maybe to be like them, but maybe to be not like them, right? And then
Yeah.
right? And then
Yeah.
look at it from a different lens, right? Because I'm in this space all the time, right? Where people make life decisions based on the boss that they might have or the manager they might have and, the toxicity that they might be around. But sometimes you can just use that as a learning experience to apply your own competencies and move, leadership forward in a different environment as you move on, right? So, not all experiences are bad, right? But,
Mm.
not all experiences are great as well. But, no, that's good. So in the space that you're in now, right, is you do a lot of coaching and development and speaking engagements, and that's where you and I kind of,
Yeah.
we connected, on that level because I think you're the only professional sports player to actually get a master's in psychology. Um,
Yeah, and that was something where I felt like when I stopped playing in 2010 and I went straight into this world of keynote speaking, I went straight into, corporate development and working with these senior leaders. And I realized I had a lot to offer and a lot to share. But with each season or year that was going by since I'd stopped playing, I just felt like I was relying a bit too much on the athletic background or playing in the Premier League. And I thought, well, actually, if I could have a really high level understanding of, the tenets of performance or the frameworks of elite performance, that would be really beneficial. So that's why I did my master's in psychology. And it's really something that is a really proud, USP for me to be able to say that no one else has ever played in the Premier League and have a master's in psychology. And it doesn't mean I know everything or lots of things. It just means
Mhm.
I have an understanding greater than any other person on the planet. To be able to get into that 0.0001% of people that have got that level from a professional level, almost taking that tacit learning from playing in elite sport and then trying to understand what it's like to put it into a framework. And ultimately, it's how does this apply to your world? That's my greatest question I try to answer every time I'm speaking for Microsoft or Cisco or KPMG or Rolls-Royce, whoever it is. It's how do I take what I've shared, because ultimately I'm the least important person in the room whenever I'm speaking, and how do I share, how do I challenge, how do I, almost like jog people's thinking whenever I'm speaking in front of them so that they can start to take even more ownership and accountability for their careers. Because ultimately, Eric, whenever I'm asking people the question of, what does success look like for you, majority of people have no idea.
No,
And
it almost
that's not to judge them. I'm not saying that's
no.
a good or bad thing. That's just for me saying that's my observation over 15 years of asking tens of thousands of people. And I'm not saying that you need to have and obviously it's completely their own prerogative. I'm just saying from my perspective, I've just been so drilled. I've been coached on a daily basis to get better. I've been so, this is what we're working towards. This is where we're going. And ultimately, this is what allows us to have really, really top performance. So all you're doing is taking what works in one industry and applying it to the corporate world. And again, it's why most people end up in that mediocre, average, you know, category because it's really hard to do it into the furthest away you get from that middle and that
Right.
averageness to get to the very extreme levels takes a lot of work, and most people aren't prepared to sacrifice it.
Yeah, I think that's fair, but I think it's also going to, when you first came on, if we would have really teased out, like, who are you, right? Or, why are you here, right? Because that's one of the questions that I ask all of the time when I'm, giving, engagement speeches or, even talking on one-on-one coaching or professional development, even with my employees, is like, why are you here is the first question I always ask. And typically people cannot answer it, right? They give you what they think you want to hear, what they've heard or been coached to say, right? That sound, perfect, but they have no idea why they're here, right? Because most people are unclear on what their purpose is. So then they can't even answer of like where do they want to go with their career, right? Because they're just trying to replicate something they've seen, but they don't have the drive or they don't have the tools, the competencies, even the knowledge of how to get there, right? So they need people like you because I would challenge you. You're not the most least important person in the room, right? Because you're there for a purpose, and that's to share your knowledge and your experience with them. Not to sharpshoot anything you're saying, so please don't take it that way.
Yeah.
You know, it's just no. I think it's fascinating to me though is that people that have reached that pinnacle of their purpose, their sport, their love, right, and they perform at that level for so long because your career is extreme. It was extremely long.
Mm,
What is the difference that you see in someone that is good and those that are great? What
mm.
what do you think are some of those traits or qualities that just separates the two types of people?
Yeah. Well, I know Jim Collins wrote a book on this before, so from good to great. So I think from a sporting perspective, from my experience of working with amazing performers in the sports world, but also amazing people performers in the corporate world, it it always seems to come down to mindset. And Eric, that's almost a little bit sad from my side that most of my job, most of the time, I feel like I'm like a traveling salesman for psychology.
Right.
And it's like, why am I still trying to sell this subject of psychology that it's actually the most important thing you will ever work on? So because let's say my fire was ignited when I first read my first book on this in 1995, when I read Tony Robbins' Awaken the Giant Within, and it was just like, oh, there's a way I can take control of my life. It's not just this thing that's happening to me, and we'll see where I go, like a,
Mhm.
going down a river with no oars in the canoe, and you're just thinking, well, if I've been working on this for 30 years and I've got the benefits from it, and everything now that happens in my life doesn't happen by accident. Because the fact when I was 16, my goal was I want to be a Premier League footballer. I want to be a professional. I want to be an international footballer. And 20 years later, tick, 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 tick. And it's not a box ticking exercise. It's me living my dream to have the best, most amazing life I could ever have. Then at 32, I stopped playing and I looked around and I observed that there were no keynote speakers from the number one sport in the world. And I'm like, that's crazy. What about like the Deion Sanders and all of the amazing athletes that have gone on to have, speaking careers for the corporate world, or you have military experts, you have academics, you have people that climbed Everest. All these other people have achieved incredible things in their career, become keynote speakers. But from the number one sport in the world, from the number one league, from the number one sport in the world, the EPL, no one had ever been a keynote speaker. And I was like, there's got to be an opportunity for me here. And wow, 15 years later, I've spoken in pretty much in every country in the world for more or less feels like every organization in the world. And it's like, this doesn't happen by accident. It happens because it's at a goal. I'm working on this to how do we keep improving? How do we keep getting better? Because, by the way, at 16, I was not the player that I ended up being at 32. And at 32, I was not the speaker that I've ended up now 15 years later, 47. But it doesn't happen by accident. It happens because of my psychology, my mental performance, my mindset, my attitude, my thinking. I don't care what you call it. It's all happening in here. And actually, this is the driving force for my health and fitness. It's the reason why now I'm in probably the best shape of my life at 47. It's the reason why I stopped drinking alcohol a year ago. It's the reason my relationships, the reason my beliefs of what I think I'm capable of are
Right.
all based on this. And yet most people don't give it a second thought of how they can improve it. And I'm like, well, if you don't want to, that's no problem. I'm just reaping the benefits of all of the reasons why psychology allows us to understand human function.
Yeah, because I also see a lot of people that get in their own way, or they can't really get to the next step. Is because of what's up here, right? All the self-doubt, right? The criticisms that they hear within themselves, right? Or the trauma that they're harboring in there, right? That they won't let go. Because anyone really can do what we do, right? If they really put in the time, the effort. I mean, now they can't. Not everyone can be a professional athlete, right? You have to actually have some of the physical gifts
Some,
to do that,
yeah,
right?
definitely some, definitely
But
some. Although, how
but
many players suddenly turn up in the NFL that didn't play it till like maybe a year or two before it? I know there's like rugby lads who have just suddenly joined the NFL recently, and they're not like a professional, an American football player. So I get what you're saying, but yes, there's lots of exceptions to that rule of what you
oh,
just said.
absolutely. But also rugby guys they're just different human beings,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's just a bit
Yeah.
weird, I know.
I got a buddy. I won't say his name on here, but I got a buddy. He's a rugby coach now, but he used to play rugby, right? And he didn't look like he was an athlete, man. I mean, he was just a solid
Yeah,
rock,
yeah,
But yeah, they're just different people. They think differently. They move differently. But I get it, right? They could probably go out there and play without pads in the
yeah.
NFL right now, right? But all right, cool. So let's talk a little bit about. So you have a book out there that I happen to read about half of it now, and it talks about no longer being a stupid footballer, and it really talks about what you just talked about is mindset,
Hmm.
right? So what prompted you to write the book, and then now that you've reflected 10 years later, or a little bit over 10 years since you
Yeah.
wrote it, how has your perspective changed, or has it remained the same?
Well, it's fascinating because I'd always wanted to write a book. And again, this comes back to the psychology mindset piece that I'd always wanted to, but I had no idea how to do it. But I think that's okay. So even in terms of what I just said, most people have no idea what they want. And that's similar to me. I actually was really clear what I wanted. I just didn't know how to write a book. But
Hmm.
again, these things happen. Life opens up, life presents opportunities. And suddenly I was on a keynote speaking course in America. As soon as I'd stopped playing, I had like an accountability partner we work with. I was thinking, I really want to write this book, don't know what to do. Anyway, he said, well, you've kind of got this framework of, the technical aspect of playing, the physical aspect, the psychology, and the social. Why don't you write your four sections and four chapters on each, and there's your 16 chapter book? And I went, wow. He's just explained it to me how to write a book. But ultimately, it was written a year after I'd stopped playing. So interesting when I share it now to anybody who's interested in having a free copy. And if anyone is interested in having a free copy, we can add it to the show notes. Hopefully, Eric, the people can
Absolutely.
download it, but or get the QR code. But interestingly, my knowledge in that book was 16 years of playing and 1 year after playing. Now, another 15 years on is why I'm writing my second book of the psychology of leadership. It feels like an entire different book because it's not only me, it talks about our leadership club, which is something that I've built in the last 5 years when I realized we have this world-class roster of performers and experts. All the people I talked about, not just from football and soccer, but what about Rugby World Cup winners? What about Olympic gold medalists? What about all these other sporting icons who could work with us and do? And what about these business leaders, people who have run multi-billion-dollar companies, people who have been in the trenches with these business leaders and understand everything they've gone through? They work with us, and these academics and military personnel and people that have cycled around the world or done incredible feats. So this world-class roster of performers and experts is all part of our leadership club. And this has allowed me to then deliver long-term leadership programs based on all of this expertise. And then we're starting to take little snippets of that information and put it into the psychology of leadership book. So it's not just my understanding and take on leadership, it's all these amazing people too, which is why I'm really excited about it. So the reflecting on the book is the first one. I loved it. Huge, hugely proud moment for me to write a book. No one in my family had ever written a book before. It'd never been published by Bloomsbury, obviously one of the, if you know Harry Potter, one of the most successful publishing houses in the world. And to be able to do that 15 years ago, which is why I'm really excited about publishing the next one, because I just feel the three topics I talk on in my career is around performance, it's around leadership, and it's around teamwork. But of course, I feel like I'm best placed because of my master's in psychology to talk around the psychology of performance or the psychology of leadership or the psychology of teamwork.
Awesome. I look forward to reading it when it's done. And I will finish your first book as well. And then we'll throw the Amazon link. You guys will see it in the notes below once you hit subscribe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so as we come up on time here shortly, so I do this with all of my guests, right? If there's one nugget, just one thing, you're talking to that young kid back in Belfast, Ireland, that's outside with his ball after he told his mom he was going to do his homework and he lied. He went outside, right? What would be that one thing, that one leadership nugget that you would leave with them that will, maybe inspire them or get them thinking differently about of life and where they want to go? And I'm putting you on the spot, so
That is
yes.
so tough to bring it into one thing. I almost have like a an overarching is just the kind of the message that I feel so many people need to hear is just keep going. So many people give up at just any, whether it's a little roadblock or a big roadblock or an absolute mountain in front of you, but there's always a way. There's always a way. That whole kind of Edison, inventing the light bulb,
Right.
all of the ways of how you find out how you can't do it. So just keep going. But that's more like just the overarching, too many people give up too easily. I'd say probably one of the best lines I ever heard around leadership is why I love this whole aspect of self-leadership, which again, I'm not trying to create waves. I didn't want to be the first to anything. I'm just like living my life and going down the route that I'm most passionate about. And ultimately for me, that could be summed up in you can't get the best out of others until you get the best out of yourself. And that for me is just something I live by every day, which is why I constantly want to push boundaries, why I constantly want to improve what I'm doing, why I constantly want to challenge what I think I'm capable of. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this in Germany when we met at the OMR conference, but one of the things we're working on now is building a business and building a tech business. And for me, I never wanted to be like a Mark Zuckerberg or one of those tech, sort of CEOs. But ultimately now, my next goal after playing in the Premier League and then being a global keynote speaker, and now I just want to open up, whether it's the Financial Times in the UK or maybe the New York Times in the US, and we just want to have this article, and the first line is Irish tech billionaire Paul McVeigh. Because Eric, why not?
Absolutely. Why not? And and I wish you nothing but the best in your aspirations and your goals, right? I think we'll open up whether it's I don't know if anyone's open up a magazine anymore, but maybe online, we'll see a headline, that states exactly that. And I want to thank you, one, for sharing your stories. I mean, you and I, we shared many stories during our time together in person. And we'll continue to foster this relationship and connection. But thank you for sharing, one, your story, your leadership journey as well, and just that that small nugget, right? For those out there, you heard it from Paul McVeigh, one of the premier players to play in the Premier League in the number one sport in the world. And I wish you nothing but the best as you continue to do great things. And thank you for investing in the activity of leadership and living your purpose, because it's inspirational.
Appreciate it, man. Keep up the good work. Keep sharing the message and fighting the good fight.
Absolutely. So, for those first-time listeners or first-time viewers, thank you for tuning in to Leadership is Tricky. For those return listeners, thank you for your continued faith in the leadership journey and activity of leadership and investing in yourself. So, Paul, thank you again, and have a great day. And for those of you that are signing off, enjoy your day, enjoy your journey.